This week, I am speaking with Deb Livingston, domain lead in the health and wellness, cooking, food, and nutrition areas for GetSetUp. Deb made this leap only with her passion for healthy food and no formal credentials. Cue the music.
Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast, brought to you by Career Pivot. This podcast is where those of us in the second half of life come together to discuss how to repurpose our careers for the 21st century. Come listen to career experts give you proven strategies. Listen to people like you tell their stories on how they repurpose their careers. And finally, get your questions answered. Your host, Mark Miller, has made 6 career pivots over the last 30 years. He understands this is not about jumping out of the frying pan into a fire, but rather to create a plan where you make clear, actionable steps or pivots to a better future career. Are you ready to repurpose your career?
Welcome to episode 267 of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. My name is Mark Miller, and I'll be your host every Monday for discussion on what it's like to repurpose your career. This week, I'm speaking with Deb Livingston, domain lead in the health and wellness, cooking, food, and nutrition areas for GetSetUp. Deb made this leap only with her passion for healthy food and no formal credentials. Deb had a pretty traditional business background, but when her mother became ill, she took a break to be with her mother in her final years. Deb joined the Career Pivot community, and through a bit of serendipity, she found GetSetUp and became a contract guide. This led her down a path that she could not have imagined. She has since guided quite a few Career Pivot members to become GetSetUp guides in both full and part-time roles. I had the GetSetUp CEO, Neil D'Souza, on the podcast in episode 242, called GetSetUp is the fastest growing online learning community for older adults. I also had Vicky Soul on the podcast in episode 260 called Vicky Soul Finds a Happy Place in Her Career by Teaching Older Adults. Teaching part-time for GetSetUp led her down a new path that she did not expect. However, before we get to the episode, let's have a word from our sponsor, Career Pivot. The Career Pivot membership community continues to help the members who are participating in this project grow and thrive. This is a community where everyone is there to help everyone else out, figure out what they want to do in the second half of life, and then make it happen. Like Deb and Vicky. Let's hear what Dean had to say about being part of the community.
First of all, you never know. There's always just a little push over the line to get you started, right? So when I first joined the community, the idea then was I'm in this particular job, and I don't want to stay at this particular job for the rest of my life. And so whatever that push needs to be, it still needs to be there. And I need to try to figure out what that is. I can remember we were over the weeks that we've been doing community meetings, people saying, hey, look, I could listen to your book, or I think you would do good at doing voice work. So that encouragement, I think that's been good from the community, is just to be able to talk to people, hear their opinions. I know that, for example, we were talking about the first book I did, and I remember, Mark, you were like, well, some of the reading was a little monotone, and it was, but it didn't hurt my feelings. I mean, I agree with you, right? I mean, it was my first book. It is what it is, and things like that are good to have, I think, and I think if somebody's looking to be a part of the community, that's one of the things they can look forward to with this.
I am recruiting new members for the next group. If you are interested in learning more about the endeavor, please go to careerpivot.com/community. Now, on to my discussion with Deb Livingston. Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast. I have the real joy of having my good friend Deb Livingston on the podcast. And Deb used to be a member of our Career Pivot community, and she's the one who essentially connected us with GetSetUp. So welcome to the podcast, Deb.
Well, thanks, Mark. Well, it's really great to see you again.
You are our trailblazer, because we have about 6 people who have gone through GetSetUp in one way or another, 6, 7, maybe even 8. And you were the first one to go get connected there. So first thing, Deb, what did you do in the first half of life?
What did I do in the first half of life? Well, I spent about 21 years working for one organization. It was a distribution company. And so that was where I spent the bulk of my time working for another company, a company. And then for about 16 years, I was self-employed. I became a consultant. I did leadership development, team development, that sort of thing. My husband was retired, had been retired for a while. So I wanted something that would be flexible so that we could travel and that sort of thing. I did a little bit of adjunct faculty work. So I worked for a local college doing some teaching. And I also spent probably the equivalent of a full-time job working for a startup nonprofit organization that started a sustainable and regenerative agricultural education center, of all things. And all of that while I was also honing skills as a master gardener for our local extension office. So, moving along through that, it was nice. It was a part-time gig as far as paid employment was concerned. And I had mostly work that came by word of mouth through relationships I had developed. And then in 2016, on my birthday, while I was in St. Thomas celebrating the marriage of my stepson, I had a phone call with my mother. Something wasn't right. And I pried it out of her. And she told me she had ovarian cancer, which, as you can imagine, hit me like a ton of bricks. And I couldn't get home fast enough. And the idea of working just didn't fit into the picture at that point. I couldn't do that to my mother, and I couldn't do that to my clients. So I finished up my projects. I didn't start anything new, and I focused on my mother for the next 2 years until she passed away in 2018. And then I was casting about for what comes next. I felt like I really needed to get reconnected. I wasn't out there anymore. So my first step was to start looking around online for groups that I might become part of. And lo and behold, there was Career Pivot. So I joined Career Pivot. I met you, Mark, and we had a nice conversation on the phone. And I said, I'm going to do it. And that's what really got the ball rolling for me to begin to rethink and to connect with people who were at that same crossroads in many different ways. So everybody's story was different, and I gained a lot of value from just becoming a part of that group. And I guess that brings me to where I am now. So I got that opportunity. If you want me to talk about that now,
how did you find GetSetUp?
Okay, well, that dovetails nicely into my work with Career Pivot, because you were so good at putting out lots of information, both written and verbal, when we got together about organizations that were out there. I think that you had done a podcast with Amava. Might have been Amava, or maybe it was a blog article with Amava. At any rate, through Amava, I remember writing down their information and joining their mailing list. I received an email that said, there's this company called GetSetUp, and they are looking for online instructors. And if you are interested, apply, send your resume to, and that's what I did.
So you reach out and connected with them. What happened next?
Well, and it's kind of funny about reaching out, because I think that you were in my head, and the other folks from Career Pivot were in my head about taking these steps and not being afraid to jump into something without feeling that I was imminently qualified. That was always my big deal. I always have felt that I needed to be at the top of any game before I would apply for a job, and that I'd have to have a lot of background in that area in order to be considered. So in this case, it was really around the time of the pandemic, and I was home alone, home with my husband, and doing, not a lot of anything. And so I just overcame those issues. And I said, what the heck? The worst they can say is no. But they didn't say no. They got in touch and they said, hey, so that we've got some steps here. You've submitted your resume. We need you to go through some training. We need you to do some mock training sessions for us. We'll do some evaluations along the way, and then we'll see whether you make it or not. And I made it. So I started with them in 2020 as a contract trainer, which was fine with me. I just wanted to work part-time, really. And I was teaching Google Classrooms to teachers because they were deer in the headlights having to teach at home without knowledge of how to use something like Google Classrooms. So my focus initially as a GetSetUp contractor was teaching that and teaching some other technical classes, such as how to use your iPad, how to use your iPhone, that kind of thing. And it wasn't all that long into the job that GetSetUp did a slight pivot themselves, because GetSetUp recognized that older adults were at home and isolated and needing to be connected during this pandemic. And so they shifted and began to offer a lot more classes that would help seniors, older adults, overcome the digital divide so that they could reconnect with their families, they could reconnect with their friends, they could learn things online. And that began with how to use your iPad and how to use Zoom and so on. And so it went from there. That just exploded because older adults just gravitated to this and became, just almost, well, their words now, addicted to GetSetUp because it provided them with a lifeline. So that's where it's gone from there. And in a year ago, actually, almost to the day, Mark, they approached me and they approached 5 others who had been contract trainers, guides, as we call them at GetSetUp, and they asked us to be domain leaders in a particular area, and they had identified 6 of those areas. And I became the domain leader for the area of food, cooking, and nutrition. And that is what I am doing to this day. Did I have professional skills in food, nutrition, and cooking? No, I did not, but I had a passion for it. I had a lot of experience with it, life experience with it. All of the things that had come before me in my areas of interest sort of came to play on this domain. And I've found it to be really challenging and a whole lot of fun to create classes and to bring folks into my kitchen, so to speak.
Well, we also have Russ Eanes, who used to be part of the community, and he has been a domain leader in travel.
Yes.
And he was on the podcast, and I'll put the link to his podcast episode in the show notes. We have Vicki Saul, who I had on the podcast about a month ago, who's not a domain leader. She's still a contractor for GetSetUp. And we've got a few other folks there. So you are, well, tell us about the cooking classes you teach.
Well, they span a wide array of topics because I try to be really attentive to what learners are looking for. So when I first began, I was teaching classes on things like healthy meals on a budget, meal planning tips, things from my desk where I just sat in front of my computer and I talked about topics of interest and got them engaged. One thing about GetSetUp that makes it kind of unique, I think, out there in the world of online learning is that we're really interactive and we focus very, very much on getting learner engagement and interaction going. So lots of conversation going. And then Neil, who is one of our owners, said, well, it would be really nice if you could start to do some classes from your kitchen. And I became an online cooking instructor from my kitchen almost overnight, which was harrowing a little bit, very challenging, required me to understand how to use multiple cameras and multiple monitors. So it was a steep learning curve a little bit. I was nervous a lot of the time. And I just channeled, I think I channeled that nervous energy into a smile and into high energy online with people and keeping them engaged and having fun in the kitchen. Something worked because they connected with that. And I've had a really good following of folks who come to my classes where we learn things like how to make meals in your Instant Pot, how to make 30-minute meals, I do spotlight classes on things like cauliflower and tomatoes and certain particular foods. I teach how to ferment foods. I teach how to soak nuts and seeds. It runs a gambit.
So how did you learn to use the multiple cameras and the multiple displays?
Well, trial and error, Mark. It really was that, and asking other people from the GetSetUp community. We were talking right before we were on this podcast. You have to know what you don't know and ask experts, rely on other people to help you. So I have been doing that a lot.
And so these cameras, did you go out and buy a bunch of SLR cameras, or what did you do?
Well, and I want to say that I do not have a Rachel Ray studio kitchen at all. Okay, what I have is my laptop camera and one other auxiliary camera, and I do play around with switching those back and forth. That's it, and I can move them around because I frequently have to move my station from my stove to another place in my kitchen. And it's a work in progress. So Neil and the company is helping me to go that next step to get to an even more professional level of presentation there.
And by the way, I've had Neil D'Souza, the CEO, on the podcast, I don't know, about 3-4 months ago. And again, I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes. Quick interruption. If you are enjoying this podcast, please rate it and review it on whatever podcast player you are using. And more importantly, would you mind telling a friend? Thanks, and back to the podcast episode. Did you ever imagine 5 years ago that you would be doing cooking classes online?
Oh, my heavens, no. Oh, my heavens, no. You know, though, Mark, it's an interesting question. If somebody 5 years ago would have given me a list with a checklist of things I might consider in my wildest dreams would be fun to do, and that was on the list, I probably would have checked the box. But I never would have thought that I would never have pursued it directly.
Yeah, I think you are a good example. You are doing something that you had no plans to do. The opportunity presented itself. You said, what the heck? Let's go try it. And one of the things we've seen inside the community is those people who are willing to, as I say, willing to go with serendipity.
Oh, that's the word.
Right? Stuff just happens and then you go, oh. And part of it is you put yourself in the position that serendipity can happen.
Yes, that you've said it very beautifully and briefly there. That's exactly what happened.
Right, you're doing Google Classrooms, which you're correct. At the beginning of the pandemic, you had teachers who were deers in the headlights, never having taught online, and now suddenly you morph that into teaching. Teaching in your kitchen, which took you way outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And now, did you buy some special lighting?
Well, you'll laugh. All I have is I have nice lighting in my kitchen, for one thing. And I actually have 2 kitchens. This became a very important thing because I've got a home. My home is small and has a kitchen in it, but it's an open floor plan. So for me to be teaching in my kitchen meant my husband couldn't be in my house. unless he wanted to go upstairs to the bedroom. So we had have another kitchen above our garage that's in a great room, an entertainment room. And that's now my studio. And it has nice lighting. And then if I need to, I use a desk lamp right now, one of those goosenecks that I can shift around. And that seems to do the job for the most part. Again, I'm no Rachel Ray at this point, but it's evolving and it's worked okay.
Yeah, this is one of those things, a desk lamp like you talk about with an LED full spectrum light bulb, which you can get at Home Depot.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you have the light on the front of you, you can take just a couple of desk lamps and shine them on you. And people think you're in Hollywood.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Mark, I'm right. I'm taking notes.
So it's not complicated.
Yeah.
It's a lot of it is just getting the light on you. By the way, one of the challenges is our homes are built to put light on working surfaces. They're not meant to put light on us. Where do you see this going?
Oh, I don't know, Mark. Right now, there's so many opportunities. I can tell you that on Wednesday last week, we had a pretty quickly pulled together meeting of staff on the East Coast, some of us on this mid-Atlantic area. I got a chance to meet Neil D'Souza for the first time. I have to say his face is just lights up all the time with what he sees as the vision for this organization. And I'm willing to follow that vision because for me, what I've learned over my many years of working now is that the vision and the values of an organization matter, and they have to be more than what the words on the wall or on the website. They have to be really alive, and the vision and the values of this company are alive in Neil D'Souza and everyone that I've worked with at GetSetUp. So it excites me to talk about what can come next. And I don't know what that might be yet. I do know that Neil has said that we're looking for people inside the organization to do all sorts of things. We want you to follow your passion too, and to do the things that you enjoy. So I think it's an open book for me where that goes next.
Yeah, I'm doing a talk in a couple of weeks back in Austin, and I'm talking about the fact that I keep on wanting to order a crystal ball on Amazon, and it's always out of stock.
Yeah, who knows?
Well, you can't predict the future right now. And I commented to Neil when I interviewed him, I said, "You're kind of making stuff up as you go along." And he said, No. I said, "Yeah, you are," because the company wouldn't be in a position that they are today if it hadn't been for the pandemic. And because it forced the shift, and the audience was very isolated and didn't know how to use technology. And it was a perfect alignment of what the company could deliver to an older population when they most needed it.
Well, I do agree that the circumstances of the pandemic created a great opportunity. And then I go back to your word serendipity, and I think about how open Neil and others were to all of that, and to seeing where the opportunity lie very quickly, and to act on that. And then not only to act on that in a small focused way, but in a way that it just continues to expand all the time. That vision of online learning is exploding beyond online learning. And we don't know where that will all go, but we do know that we have connected people in a very meaningful way online, and that some people, as a result of meeting and connecting meaningfully online, are now meeting meaningfully offline. So that we have created that and sort of dispelled the loneliness that was out there associated with the pandemic is a great start.
Well, I will tell you, the one I've really noticed the differences with Vicky Saul is Vicky, when she finishes her class, she has more people tell her, "Oh God, we love you. We thank you so much." And getting true, authentic, positive feedback. Just anyone who's been in the learning and development world knows that that kind of stuff is king. I know in my career, when I had people said, "We really appreciate what you just did," oh, that sent me in seventh heaven. And that's where I find with the combination of all the interactivity that GetSetUp is, it's the foundation of how you're supposed to do stuff there.
Yeah.
Right. And two, it is, people really appreciate what you do, and they tell you that, and it's part of the culture. It's part of the culture of the guides, but also part of the culture of the students.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Boy, you hit the nail on the head with that. I get feedback all the time from people that I'm just amazed with, because you're right. You don't really get that. You get it in the corporate world sometimes in a variety of ways, but maybe without the fervor and enthusiasm that you get through the learners. When they come on and they say, "I love this. I come to all your classes," or things like that. It's just, it keeps me going all the time.
So Deb, if someone wanted to reach out and contact you, how can they best do that?
Oh, well, you can email me at deb@getsetup.io. That would be one way. I'm on LinkedIn, Deborah Livingston. And of course, check out GetSetUp just by going on the site there. And if you register, you can test things out a little bit. You will be asked to register. We do support a very private online community. We want our learners to feel like their privacy is protected. So we ask for registration. But once you register, you can go anywhere, and you can type my name in to the search bar where classes, and it'll come up, and all my classes are there. And yeah, I think those are probably the best ways.
And we will put a link to her email address, the LinkedIn profile, and more importantly, a link to all your classes, so people can reach out and find you.
It would be great. And I'd love to talk with anybody who has an interest in GetSetUp or teaching, or, just wants to know more about how all of this is working, because it's a pretty phenomenal opportunity that I've had to get started with a startup again. Not easy. It's a lot of work, but yeah, it's a unique experience, and we're global. So I'm meeting people from all over the world, and it's been fantastic.
Well, it's interesting. I've been talking a lot with Liz Miller, who's the communications, and she's an American living in Brazil. And I've been in contact with folks with GetSetUp in France and all over the place. So, Deb, you're a trailblazer, and I bet you never thought you'd be one.
No, I never thought of myself as a trailblazer, but thanks, Mark. I'll take it.
So thank you very much for telling your story on the Repurpose Your Career podcast.
You're more than welcome. It's so great to see you.
I hope you found this interesting. Deb is doing something she did not expect, and in fact, it did not exist a few years ago. It was a bit of serendipity and Deb's willingness to try something that was outside of her comfort zone. Take a moment, go to careerpivot.com, sign up for the weekly Career Pivot Insights newsletter, which is sent out every Sunday. You'll get a weekly update on this podcast and new blog posts. While there, do not forget to check out the Career Pivot community. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Look for Career Pivot on Facebook and LinkedIn. Also, you can find me on Twitter at Career Pivot. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. You will find all the show notes at careerpivot.com/episode 267. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podbeam, Overcast, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, and lots of other places where podcasts can be found. In fact, this podcast can be found on the Repurpose Your Career podcast channel on YouTube. Hope to see you next Monday for another episode of Repurpose Your Career podcast.